Patrick Lyons.
Item number 2, adoption of minutes from the March 2nd, 2022 regular meeting. Are there any additions, deletions, motion?
Move we approve the minutes as written.
Is there a second? All in favor? Item number 3 is the final plan review for major use site development entitled A and B LLC for Aaron Wiswell. The proposal is to construct a 1,512 square foot automated car wash building on a 0.66 acre parcel, tax map 135, lots 13 and 14, and tax map 134, lot 150, located at 59 and 61 High Street and 62 Dean Street. The subject property is located in the downtown zoning district. Is there a representative here for Mr. Wiswell?
Andrew McCullough with Aaron Wiswell.
Okay. And Andrew, you said
Well,
Aaron's
that's the
gonna,
plan.
should be joining us on Zoom, or? Oh, okay.
I can see him.
He may need to
He
speak to
talks
come
to
into
you.
the foreground.
Yeah.
Mr. Wiswell, are you present?
I'm here.
Okay, now we can see you. Okay, thank you. It's all yours, Andrew.
Okay, and again, I'm reading from, or paraphrasing, if you will, from page 2, essentially page 2 of what I prepared. And the primary concerns that we discussed at the March 2nd meeting, and that I felt we needed to present additional information for your review, were a traffic study at the driveway entrance, the intersection with Dean Street and High Street, and the intersection with Dean Street and Water Street. Improvements to screening and landscaping, revisions to operating hours and procedures, and overhead versus underground electric service. I'll try to hit a couple of these that probably don't require a lot of discussion. One, we propose the overhead electric because we will need to bring the service across the street as it's overhead right now on the opposite side of Dean Street. So rather than adding another pole and then going underground for, say, maybe 20 feet to the building, I thought it made just as much sense to go overhead from the utility pole in the street straight to the building, straight to a mast on the building. So that's our plan for our electrical service and our utilities coming in. We did, or I tried my best to articulate the operations that, or the limitations on operations that we had discussed so that they were characterized. We talked about hours of operation for the car wash itself being 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. The power to the vacuums being turned off at 7 p.m. An employee will be on site daily to maintain the facility as well as oversee operations during peak days. As we had talked previously, the name and contact information will be provided to the city prior to the issuance of the CO. Overhead doors on the exit side of the building will be closed during drying operations to limit neighborhood noise. The improvements to screening and what I had mentioned that essentially came to my mind prior or while we were at the meeting last time was to try to incorporate screening along Dean Street in the strip, if you will, the 3-foot wide to 4-foot wide strip that's between the sidewalk and the pavement, or the retaining wall and then the pavement. So we did present in our final plan for landscaping, we presented a plan for landscaping that area with plantings similar to what we've proposed up on the High Street side. As we talk about screening, we are proposing the solid panel PVC fence along the residential properties. And we had talked about going to 8 feet wide. That is in this proposal as far as part of our screening to go to 8 feet wide. So,
Sorry, Andrew, 8 feet wide or 8 feet tall?
8 feet tall, I'm sorry. Yeah. I should look down and not up, maybe. So, to discuss the primary issue, we went out and we performed a manual traffic count at the intersection of Dean Street and Water Street. During approximately 11:10 to 12:10. And then we did the same thing the next day at Water Street, or no, not Water, at High Street and Dean Street. One of the reasons, well, obviously that's the time of year we have, but also in discussing with Aaron, March is his peak month of the year for his car wash. And so we felt that was fairly representative of a peak hour of operations of the facility. Not necessarily, definitely not peak hour of High Street, but peak hour, which was recommended last month when Mr. Lyles was here. He said he felt that was the best time to assess it, would be a peak hour of the facility. So that's where we tried to get to. In two of the things that are maybe easier to discuss were the stacking and the concern regarding headlights when vehicles were entering the site, which are all included in the on and off-site traffic impacts narrative. So for stacking, Aaron has cameras that operate at his South Berwick facility. And so I believe, and I shouldn't talk off my head, but I believe it was March, it was shortly after the planning board meeting. It was either March 4th or 5th or 6th, that weekend after the planning board meeting. Aaron provided me with a video of 5 hours of operation of the facility. And so during that time, it's essentially an identical facility to this. During that time, there were no more than 5 vehicles stacked for the touch-free bay, which is the highest volume bay. And so I felt that was a very good indication of what, I mean, we've provided a plan that shows stacking, we've provided a plan that shows in excess of being able to stack 5 vehicles in 2 lanes. But I felt that was a very good indication of what is anticipated to be the peak.
Can I add, I wanna add to that
Yes.
real quick.
Okay,
We
go ahead.
also operate an Aroma Joe's at that same
Yes,
site,
that's true.
and we service it with 2 lanes, just like is proposed up there. One lane dedicated to the car wash and 1 lane dedicated to the Aroma Joe's. So that site gets a considerable amount of traffic, not just for the car wash, it's more for the Aroma Joe's. And so there's more congestion there, I guess is the best way to put it. So the cameras that we showed him were also including all the Aroma Joe's traffic, and we don't have issues with stacking.
Well, Andrew, comparative, I mean, I know where North Berwick is, but I'm not familiar with the town really.
Right.
Can you give us a sense of the traffic on where this other car wash is located, as far as, how does that compare to High Street?
Aaron, I,
So it's actually, Route 9 in, North Berwick. So it's a highly traveled road to, say, Wells, the beaches or something like that. Pratt and Whitney is a mile or 2 from me, which they have over 4,000 employees. They run 3 shifts, so the traffic is pretty absurd, I guess is the best way to put it. And then we also, on the other side of us, we have Huzzy Seating Company, which they have about, I'm guessing, but 800 to 1,000 employees. They run 2 shifts. So I don't know, because I never heard an actual traffic count for High Street. But I know that, we've got probably 15 to 16,000 cars a day going by our site.
Is that a 2-lane road or a 4-lane road?
2-lane road,
2-lane.
so it's very congested.
And
There is a turning lane, that's the only difference.
And the other piece of information that I did provide to you was, I did find online, the land use ordinance, as I talked about, from Pasco County, Florida, and Dade City, and just as a basis of comparison for you, their ordinance requires stacking for 5 vehicles for each bay of an automated car wash. So I tried to give some substance to what appeared to be reasonable based on video of a busy day at Aaron's other car wash. So to talk about traffic at, I guess I'll start with driveway intersection with Dean Street. So as we parked, and honestly, there were 2 of us counting in order to keep track of, one keeping track of northbound lanes, one keeping track of southbound lanes, especially on High Street. It wasn't as bad on Water Street, but, so we took the volume that we observed going by the site, east and west on Dean Street, when we did the count at the High Street intersection. And then we integrated, or we introduced the additional trips from the facility into those trips that were on the street during that time. And we did this analysis using the highway capacity manual procedure for stop-controlled T intersection, three-way intersections. And so what we found was that even with the additional trips in and out of the facility at that driveway entrance, the driveway entrance would operate at level of service A. Then at the Dean Street, High Street intersection, again, we took the counts, we used the analysis from the highway capacity manual. We did not observe any vehicles while we were there, even attempting to turn left from Dean Street onto High Street. So that movement was a 0. Based on our assumed distribution, we had 14 vehicles entering and leaving the facility. We would have 14 vehicles entering and leaving the facility through the intersection. If the facility was operating at peak capacity. And to try to give you a better basis, I tried to outline, or I did outline or just characterize how level of service is assessed at a stop-controlled intersection. So there is a sheet of calculations that you go through with all the different turning movements integrated into the traffic. And you look at approximately 3 or 4 tables, and you get to a reserve capacity at the intersection, which is the additional number of vehicles that could move through the intersection during that hour of time. If the intersection has greater than 400 vehicles of reserve capacity, and there's little or no delay, it's considered level of service A. So then, and as I've broken it down, 300 to 399 vehicles is level of service B. 200 to 299 is level of service C. So it takes essentially 100 vehicles to reduce an intersection 1 level of service. And we are looking at 14 vehicles or 12 vehicles and passing through one of those intersections during an hour. Now, the counts that I have certainly don't reflect July numbers on the main street. No argument from me there. However, $14 vehicles or 18 vehicles, let's say, are still, even if there's less reserve capacity, we're not gonna reduce it by 100 trips with our facility that would even reduce it by one level of service, which is permitted under the ordinance. So, again, we assessed the Dean Street High Street intersection on March 15th. As I was sitting and observing, I was also looking at the amount of delay that the existing cars experienced, whether it was down on whether it was cars turning out of Dean Street onto Water Street, whether it was cars turning from Water Street onto Dean Street, or whether it was cars turning out of Dean Street onto High Street. And I can tell you that during those timeframes that we were observing, there was no car that experienced more than a 5-second delay in turning in any of those movements. And so I believe that reflects on the level of service, essentially a level of service A during this time of observation that we found going through the calculations. I'm sure we're gonna circle back to that, but we did look at the standards for headlights also, and the elevation of headlights when they're entering the site, when they're leaving the site, and the state of Maine standards for headlights include a minimum height of 22 inches above ground and a maximum height of 54 inches above ground, with the top of the beam being at the maximum height of the light. So the top of the beam would be at, say, 54 inches. The building itself blocks the beams from the Tainter residence as the cars enter. So there's no direct headlights on the Tainter residence as they enter the site. Once the cars are level, essentially on the paved yard, the headlights are hitting these fences. On the west side, below the site, we brought the fence up onto the berm of the detention area, the pond area, if you will, so that as those cars exit, their lights are hitting that fence. If the fence was down below the berm, their lights were gonna go over the fence. So we brought the fence up. The lights hit the fence that way, and then the cars turn and exit the site. So we attempted to walk through the issues or address the issues that we had discussed last month and tried to present to you at least a summary of information. I did not present to you all the calculations that went into it, but at least a summary of what was observed, what we found.
Okay. Maybe to just, maybe have Elena address the the traffic issues, the report that Andrew did, she sent this to Richard Wiles for him to review it, and he did respond back to her with several pages of comments, and perhaps Elena could just summarize what Richard.
And I'll note too, I used to drive to the beach myself on that road, from where I lived last before returning to Ellsworth, and I know that stretch and that crossroads, and it is a busy place where the Pratt and Whitney facility is a huge, industrial, with, I think, shift work and all of it. Not just like High Street, but a busy area and a very populated area. Okay, so in the memo that I prepared, I tried to summarize Mr. Lyle's comments, and prefaced them with a couple of my own, one of which is just to recall that this project didn't necessarily have to come for a major use site plan review. It didn't hit any of those definite thresholds in the ordinance, aside from the threshold that says if in the discretion of the code enforcement officer, they feel it would be best reviewed by the planning board, then go for it. So it doesn't necessarily make a difference, but it's not a huge development in terms of what normally requires planning board review as a baseline. And the other thing was just, I think Andrew addressed it, but not being a traffic engineer myself by any means, but High Street is such a busy street. I think it's more like 40,000 cars on a peak summer day. Don't totally hold me to that, but I think we saw that last summer, now that things are extremely busy. Water Street is very busy too, so my understanding is kind of that a development on Dean Street would need to be quite large to, make a difference in how intense that already is on those main roads. But anyway, Rick's comments. So, and I think that a lot of what Mr. McCullough was just giving us was partly in response to this, because he saw this afternoon as well. That maybe March isn't a peak period. Same for Water and High Street. We definitely know that about the streets. It kind of makes sense to me what you said about March being peak for the other facility. That's when I would wash my car. It's still getting salty and sandy, yet it's warm enough that I want to actually go do it. That the maximum impact of any land use, he's just kind of speaking generally to all traffic studies here, could be the peak hour of the use generating traffic. It could be the peak hour of the street, receiving and contributing to that traffic, or it can be a combination of the two. He did think that the intersection at Water Street could have been examined better. He said that the material about aisles, I think that's probably referring to the stacking.
Yes.
Seemed good. Not knowing enough about Dade City, while the population or the area population might be similar, there might be other factors about that part of the country that isn't similar to us. But that in general, the numbers provided are probably good. Good as they can be without getting into much more sophisticated traffic engineering techniques. That the analysis of the driveway, like intersecting with Dean Street, can't be checked. I'm not sure if he means, he says something along the lines of that cannot be checked as there is little detail provided, so I think he's meaning in like a peer review type of sense.
I think he means in a peer review, or, providing the specific calculations,
Yeah,
which I just tried to summarize for you without going into.
sure. But still, he was of the opinion that there wouldn't be much of a problem at that driveway onto Dean Street entrance. Similarly, couldn't check calculations for Dean and High Street. And again, March might not be typical, but you addressed somewhat the extrapolation there. And he commented that the calculations weren't there, but you did, after our TRT meeting, you did beef that up a bit about what the level of service means in terms of number of cars and reserve capacity, so that was improved compared to the version that Rick was provided. I wrote this, I left out a word here, but he meant, it seems that 0 left turns may not have been used in, or no, I did it right.
Yeah.
0 left turns were used in calculations, which leaves out kind of potential scenarios. But my understanding would be that you took what you observed and applied
Correct.
it to the situation.
Correct.
So I can't comment on the applicability of that, but comparing it to the prior land use, which was a subway and a couple of residential structures, might not tell you much unless they had similar trip generation characteristics, like if that 11 a.m. was the same time that subway and the residential peaked, is what he's getting at there. I would think actually a subway would be busiest at lunchtime. Residential, not so much, but there were, what, maybe 3 or 4, maybe 5 residential units there?
There probably were close to 5.
Yeah.
But I didn't incorporate all 5 because I didn't want to, I really don't try to guess too much. I try to stay relatively with reasonable assumptions.
And I mean, I would kind of agree with Rick there. It's been several years since any of that was there or operational. So, you know, we don't look at other developments of a vacant lot and look back 5, 10, 20 years as to what did it used to be, generally. And just in general, that, you know, that this shouldn't set the bar for traffic impact analyses in general, was his comment, but in this situation, that a more detailed analysis probably wouldn't give the board much more information than what's here, and that makes sense to me.
And I mean, I frankly am not trying, like you say, I'm not trying to set the bar because I think it's a function of there's a lot of factors that go into what level of analysis needs to be done. If we were to be presenting a hotel or something like that with higher trip counts and a lot more things going on, there certainly needs to be a much higher level of detail provided to you. And I think that it could be hard for you or the planner, I mean, unless with having someone like Rick Lyles who has expertise to know exactly, to say, okay, before the work is ever done, these are the specific things that we need to look for. Or maybe in a future ordinance, we have some of those things spelled out because, you know, a traffic study can take a lot of different directions or not, depending on the project.
Are there any questions from the board on traffic? If not, one thing I'd like to bring up, and kind of a little bit of an education for the board and the neighbors, and we've talked about noise being produced on the site. Kind of 2 different types of noise. Noise from the machinery itself, from the car wash, from the vacuum cleaners, and maybe somebody driving in to use a vacuum cleaner and blasting the stereo. And we talked about, well, we have a noise ordinance. Just for a little bit of education, and you all got a copy, I asked Elena to give us all a copy of the noise ordinance. Now, this was written back in 2009 by yours truly in my other life, except for CVI, the section that has to do with the decibel levels. Now, the noise that, say if somebody goes on the property, uses the vacuum cleaners and blasts a stereo, could be handled under section 2A and B, but it also could be handled under the criminal statute of disorderly conduct. And most likely a police officer, if they responded to that type of complaint, would handle it under the criminal statute just because it's easier to handle it that way. That last section here, the CVI, we had discussions, I mean, you've given us decibel levels for the different machinery, and there's been some comments, from the neighbors on the vacuum cleaners, and I asked Patrick to review this, because that section there, that CVI, I don't think is written very well. I think the police department would have a hard time enforcing that, because the biggest issue is, as a guide, officers may use a sound meter that has a range between 40 decibels and 130 decibels as a guide to determine if the noise is above 90 decibels for more than 30 minutes. Now, I interpret that as that noise would have to be above that level constantly for 30 minutes. It's highly unlikely that even if the car wash had both bays going, both vacuum cleaners, all the vacuum cleaners going at one time, it would reach that level for 30 minutes. I asked Patrick to review it, and maybe he wants to give us his opinion of just whether or not, the noise ordinance for that is really usable.
Yeah, and John asked me, because I'm a land use attorney, and so I interpret ordinances a lot during my day job and here with you folks. But I think the problem is there's ambiguity. Is 90 decibels for more than 30 minutes, is that one continuous 30-minute block, or is that 1 minute 30 times a day? And what is that for more than 30 minutes in 24 hours and 12 hours? It doesn't say. But I think it is, so yeah, it's difficult to interpret, but I think that what is helpful for the board is it does use the threshold of 90 decibels. So, again, sound is difficult. It's a difficult issue to measure and a different, to enforce, but, I think just considering issues of noise, I think that 90 decibel threshold is helpful for the board to consider. What the city views as kind of a unreasonable level of sound when reviewing any concerns regarding noise. I think that's as far as I would go with.
And maybe a guide for, if it's approved, that if police department or code comes down and takes a reading and it's above that, to say, hey, you guys need to do something. Did you want to say something? Like
Yeah,
that?
could I interject for a sec? And I don't have the ordinance right in front of me, but isn't it only applicable between 10 PM and 6 AM?
Yes.
When
Yeah.
this business won't be operating?
It doesn't.
It doesn't?
It doesn't refer to, I mean, there's some
Oh, does it say-
activity that's sound created from construction activities between the hours of 10 PM and 6
I see.
AM. The noise is not limited to that. This particular section, again, it goes to the way it was written.
Okay,
If the city wanted to really use that in this instance, or, I mean, this was written specifically to address a noise problem at another establishment.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's
That the
not the
city
way
was
to
having
write
problems with.
rules.
But to really use that, to be able to take a case to court, that section there would have to be improved. I mean, it doesn't even say where you take the reading from. You take the reading from the neighbor's property line. I just wanted everybody to know that section, because we've talked about it so much.
I have a second little thing to just add on to that is, part of the reason that we have landscaping buffers and setbacks is specifically, like, when you have exposed machinery or truck loading or things like that. It's in your, section 801 actually talks about this. The reason we have buffers is not just visual, it's also auditory. So, that's why we require spacing from your property lines, and then some combination of perhaps fences or vegetation, or, there's some flexibility in that. If you had a residential home and a warehouse with a loading dock at 4 a.m, you might make them put a berm in or something to deal with that, but this situation is not to that extreme, I don't think.
No, I think the fencing and the vegetation that grows will help deaden some of the sound. I would ask Mr. Wiswell, did you happen to get a copy, read the most recent email from Jason Barrett?
I did, I got it just before the meeting, yep.
Okay. Just kind of going along and discussing noise. On the second page, the first paragraph, right in the middle, he has a couple sentences bolded. And do you have any comments about his request?
So if I'm speaking to the same thing, it says the noise impact from the vacuum customer will be mitigated, reducing the number of stations.
Yes.
Is that what you're referring to?
Yes.
Yep, so, he had reached out to Andrew a few days ago, and Andrew sent me an email, and, I told him I'm not against going from 3 vacuums to 2 vacuums if that appeases, the neighbors. We've already adjusted the time, to help with that, so, I am confident that this is not gonna be a nuisance to the neighbors, and I'm trying to do everything I can to be forthright with this and do everything, trying to appease everybody and to eliminate one more vacuum if that's the end all be all, I'm in.
How many vacuums do you have at the North Berwick facility, Aaron?
I have 2, and it's only due to restrictions. I just don't have the room for more than 2. But typical, like I built another site, and I have 4 vacuums in at that site. But again, that's not my primary operation. The vacuum is kind of like a necessary evil. With a car wash, people like to go and vacuum their cars. But for me, truthfully, they're more of a nuisance than they are. Than good. So I'm okay with going to 2.
Then on that line, are you okay with going to 2 and keeping the same configuration that you have for the 3 and just getting rid of the vacuum that's closest to the Tainter property line?
Yeah, location wise, that's fine. I have no problem with that.
In your North Berwick location, do you find that since there's only 2 vacuums, that you have people waiting to use a vacuum after they wash their car?
No, I mean, that's a hard one. I mean, on busy days, potentially, but I don't think people are gonna hang around, to use the vacuum. They'll just come back later if it's busy. It's not like waiting in line for a car wash, because there's really no place, unless you just pull off and park, there's no place to wait in line.
Andrew, if you could refresh my memory, I thought you did some sound study work, basically like 15 yards from the vacuums or something like that in the previous version. And am I misremembering, or were there some estimates on how loud in decibels that the anticipated operation would be at a certain distance?
We had provided some information, and it would take me a few minutes to find it, but, as we discussed, a little bit, the sound is a logarithmic function, so it's not a linear drop, and so it either increases rapidly or decreases rapidly as you go out by distance. And so and maybe I'm not remembering right, but it seemed like it was down at 50-some decibels at the property line to the west of which is the closest from those vacuums. It was down at around, the noise levels were down around 55.
And that's kind of what I'm fishing for. There's a reference here, that Mr. Barrett makes in his email, 75 to 80 decibels for the machinery
That's
itself.
at the machine, that's not at
Exactly,
the
it's at
property
the
line.
machinery, and so what I'm trying to
Right.
extrapolate is at the property line.
Right.
What is the? what's
And
the-
I have not assessed it at his property line, but again, when we assessed it, looking at the closest property line, I believe that we were down around 55.
And the 8-foot fences, Andrew, are on the southern boundary too, near the vacuums?
Yes, they are,
So there'd be that, and then there'd be 8-foot fence along the
correct.
northern
Yes,
west
and,
edge.
and there's nothing scientific, or there isn't data from, let's say, the fence company saying, oh yeah, our fence is gonna drop the decibel levels like 10 decibels.
Yeah,
But there is a drop with that. And the only example I can give you is when we did the basketball courts for the city, and we installed the sound barriers around the one court. Those sound blankets were, had a rating of dropping the sound 29, I think it was 29 decibels, which is a significant amount. So, yes, a solid structure drops sound. If you're shopping for something that strictly reduces sound, you can find data that's specific to that. A fence, they're not gonna publish that for a solid panel PVC fence.
Mr. Wiswell, any comments on his second request for having sound dampening backstops behind the vacuums?
I think it's crazy excessive, honestly. I don't think for the amount that the vacuums are gonna get used, and, we're limiting down to 2. We have a PVC fence. The distance, how close is his house to a vacuum? I can't answer that question because I don't know in front of me, but it's like,
Nope, I understand.
we're getting to a point of splitting hairs on certain things, and I think that's very excessive.
Okay, no, just asking, because he asked.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from the board? And I will open a public hearing. If there's anybody here in the audience who would like to ask the board some questions or make some comments, please come up to the podium, identify yourself by name and where you live. Or you on here on the campground. Looks like you're all here on the campground. Oh, okay.
I'm Calvin Anderson, I'm here representing Harmon Tire and Car Wash. Some of you folks know I've been, managed the Ellsworth Car Wash for 13 years and then been with Harmon's on and off over 10 years. The only thing that comes to my mind is the stacking issue with traffic. Because if any of you have either visited either of those other locations, you will see that people will wait in line. If it wasn't for High Street right directly in front of Harmon's, the cars would be past our building. And in the other car wash, there were times when the cars were stacked back past Agway waiting to enter. So when people decide to get their car washed, some of them are patient, some will not wait, some will. I think you'll find there'll be people parking on the street, waiting to get into the car wash.
Okay, I did, to kind of answer that, Calvin, I did ask Elena to bring up with the police department, the issue of no parking signs there on Dean Street from High Street down to Edgewood Way. I think that's the name of it. where-
Yes.
And right now, there's just one sign, no parking from here to corner on the north side. The chief thinks that it'd be okay to post on the south side of Dean Street from Edgewood Way up to High Street, and then also the no parking from here to corner that's currently there on the north side. He didn't think there was anything necessary beyond that to the driveway, but stated additional parking restrictions can be posted anytime if warranted. So we did discuss that quite a bit as to whether that stacking would come out onto Dean Street and create a problem for traffic.
And then the only other question that I had relates to the drag-out water, or water that's left on vehicles or in pickups. When I have viewed videos of the Laser 360 wash, which is what the gentleman's going to be putting in. And yes, it does stop some of the machinery from spraying water in the direct back of pickup truck bodies, but as they exit that car wash, they'll be going downhill till they get to Dean Street. All the water that's in the back of the truck will collect towards the back of the cab. Most vehicles nowadays, pickup trucks have liners, bed liners or whatever. If they turned left to go up to High Street and turn towards Bar Harbor, the water that's in the back of that vehicle would come out. If they went to the bottom of Dean Street, there's a little rise before you get back onto Water Street, which the water would come out. And not just pickup trucks, but every vehicle brings out a certain amount of water, no matter how hard you dry them. And you can see in the videos that every location that has one of those machines has wet driveway exiting. That's my only other concern. On Outer High Street, when I was there, the city made us take very good care of Beckwith Hill because of the water drug out onto that street.
And that's another point we have discussed, Calvin, and Mr. Wiswell realizes that could be a problem, and he has agreed to, just like Ellsworth Car Wash, would have to get a sander out there and take care of the ice buildup.
I guess that would be the only questions I had.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And everybody else in the back is for the campground. So I will close the public.
Is there anyone online?
Oh. Carrie shaking her head, no? Okay. I'll close the public hearing. Would somebody care to make a motion, or do you have any other questions of the applicant or Andrew? And there are some conditions.
So
That
there's
the planner
there's
has.
the waiver 113.
Yep, and then there's. Kind of both the,
Hours of operation.
so actually starting from here. All that should be in the motion.
You also might consider if you since Mr. Wiswell seemed to be amenable to removing the third vacuum, you could add that as revising the plan to remove the third vacuum on the northerly side of the property prior to the signing of plans. If you feel that's necessary, but I don't know that you have to.
You can throw that in there.
All right, make a motion, we find complete a final plan review for major use site development entitled A and B LLC for Aaron Wiswell. Proposal to construct a 1,512 square foot automated car wash building on a .66 acre parcel, tax map 135, lots 13 and 14, and tax map 134, lot 150, located at number 59 and number 61 High Street and number 62 Dean Street. Subject property located in the downtown zoning district. With the conditions that the board grant a waiver from section 813 and the applicant agree to limit the hours of operation for the automatic car wash to 7 a.m. through 9 p.m. with vacuums limited to 7 a.m. through 7 p.m. Overhead doors on the exit side of the building shall be kept closed during the drying operation. The applicant will consult with the city planner and revise note on SB 3 regarding replacement of street, tree, and high street right-of-way to identify a tree species that will tolerate salt. Update plans to list all conditions of this approval to be met prior to beginning the site work, issuance of building permits or certificates of occupancy completion, and the applicant agrees to reduce the number of vacuums in the plan from 3 to 2.
Did you want the last two, Elena?
Yes, please, if you could just
Okay.
clarify
Sure.
when they're to be met.
And conditions to be met prior to issuance of the building permit will be obtain approval for highway and road opening permits, and conditions to be met prior to certificate of occupancy, provide the names and contact information for parties responsible for maintenance of the facility, including winter snowplow removal and salt and sanding.
Anything else, Elena?
I think you probably have to do one vote on the waiver and one vote on the approval, but technically, I think that would be best. I kind of wrapped it all together, but I don't think there's a problem to do two separate.
To do two separate?
Just to make sure you all agree on the waiver and then you all agree on approving.
Okay, so we're just,
Or not necessarily all agree, but most of you.
so you're talking about the waiver from section 813?
Yes.
Okay, so motion is to grant a waiver from section 813. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? Okay, the second motion is what Nelson just read off, and did you want to amend that to include that it's going to be reduced to 2 vacuums?
He mentioned that.
Oh, did it? Okay.
Yeah. Did you clarify the one removed is on the northerly boundary?
So the applicant agrees to reduce the vacuums in the plan from 3 to 2, with the one being removed is the one closest to the west side of the property. Thank you.
Did you say number 3 regarding the police chief and revise the signage? I don't know,
Did I skip it?
the highlighted
No, I wasn't
section.
quite sure. Why is that highlighted?
It was highlighted because that was kind of my mistake. I thought he hadn't responded before I finalized this, and it was an email I missed while I was out one day. So, he had clarified what he would like to see. So that's why I highlighted it, so that we could revisit it. But now you had his comments as of tonight. I'm a little conflicted. I think, yeah, we can kind of leave it as it is worded. Because that is within the police chief's purview to
Yeah.
place those signs, so.
Okay, so we'll go without number 3.
Go without number 3?
Yes.
Yeah, my understanding was the police department would place signing as they see appropriate.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, we have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Roosevelt.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Goodbye, Tyler.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sound reduced site plans.
Is that over 90 decibels?
Yeah, I think this is over 90 decibels.
What are sirens usually, decibel wise?
When we get into that.
Loud by design, right?
Over 100 for all of them?
Over 100?
Yeah. I was dealing with the sound issue in another matter in Bar Harbor, and we had someone comparing like what is what. It's fun, you know, like shotgun blasts versus jackhammers and all that.
Okay, we'll move on to item number 4, sketch plan review for major use site development entitled Dawnland Campground for Tim Stone, Scott Bradshaw, and Matt Pervonen. I hope I didn't mess that up too bad. The proposal is to construct a campground consisting of 22 campsites, including 6 tent sites, 4 camper trailer, tiny house, hookup sites, and 12 tree houses on approximately 3 acres of a 62-acre parcel, tax map 53, lot 16, located on the Bucksport Road. The subject property is located in the rural zoning district. Is there someone here representing the developer?
Yes, this is Scott Bradshaw.
Okay.
I'm one of the developers. And I think I'm sharing my screen, if everyone can see it.
Yes, we can.
Great. Well, thank you for having us today. We're greatly appreciate it. Just wanted to kind of go through an outline of what we'll be presenting today. Who we are, a vision for the campground development, a summary of the development, and then just a review of some of the ordinance highlights that we thought were applicable to the project, and then just some project implementations and permits, questions, type of thing. So jumping into who we are, we're three different families, and maybe I'll turn it over to Tim and let him introduce himself.
So I'm Tim Stone, and I am not quite there yet, but I'm hopefully going to be living in Otter Creek.
And Matt, I think you're on mute. There you go.
Yeah, I'm Matt Privinen. I'm a structural engineer in Billings, Montana, and good friends with both Tim and Scott.
Yeah, and I'm, like I said before, I'm Scott Bradshaw. I'm a professional civil engineer located in Bozeman, Montana. Matt and I are brother-in-laws, and Tim and I have known each other since we were kids. So we've got a lot of connections, and we're just kind of doing this development as kind of a passion project. It's just something that we've identified that we want to do together, and we're excited about it. So the vision for our development is really to develop a low-impact, low-density campground that maintains the natural character of the wooded property while providing short-term rental guests a solitary, peaceful experience, and also provides benefits to the Ellsworth community. So a summary of some actions completed to date. We're under contract right now on the subject property, set to close on May 2nd. Tim has conducted a site visit, went up there and took a look at the property and took some pictures for us all. We've also reviewed the applicable city and state ordinances. We've had a fact-finding call with Thomas with the city fire, and then we've had a sketch plan review meeting with the city staff as well. We've also prepared a sketch plan and some financial forecasting as well. So for the location of this development, we're looking just north of Upper Patton Road. It's just across the street from Big Chicken Barn Bugs. I think that's a landmark that everyone's familiar with. And it's 62 acres. And we're looking to develop that 62 acres with six tent sites. So we're thinking glamping type tent sites that have their bathrooms and running water, common space with a pergola, and a laundry shed, that type of thing. And then also looking to have 2 trailer spots that we might park some tiny homes at, that would also have septic and water hookups. We're also looking to have around 10 tree houses, and each one of those tree houses would have individual bathrooms and running water. We'd obviously need an access road to access the campgrounds, the tent sites, and the tree houses. And so we'd be building that would be part of the infrastructure. We'd also, along with that access road, be building in some snow storage areas so that we can plow this for winter access. We also provide some fire cisterns in some various locations that we've talked through with Thomas. And then we'd also be building some trails, approximately 1.1 miles of trail is what we're thinking for right now through the site. And so just develop a summary of that site plan, and I'll pull up a PDF version that we can kind of zoom in on here in a second. But we're really looking for that low density development. So the Ellsworth rural zoning allows 6 units per acre. We're only looking towards the campsites being about 1 site per acre. The same for the trailers and the tiny homes. And then for the tree houses, spread out a little bit more, about 1 every 3.3 acres. So we're looking to be quite a bit more spread out than what's allowed by the city ordinance. We're also looking to have that low impact and natural character integrity for the development. So we're looking to meet or exceed local ordinances for septic systems, stormwater Bs, and energy code. As a minimum, we're also looking to disturb the minimum amount of property that we can, maintaining as much of the woods as possible. So in order to accomplish that, looking for minimal or no footings for the tree houses. So possibly having those kind of grounded to the trees themselves. And then glamping tents would have minimal footings as well. That would limit soil impact, soil erosion, that type of thing. We're also looking to minimize the septic system footprints, and then minimize the road. The road extents as much as we can. Again, really looking to maintain the character of the woods that are out there right now. Some of the community benefits that we see that this development could bring is attracting vacationers, providing some employment, especially during construction, and then increasing the city's tax base, and then also providing a trail system. And let me pull up the PDF.
So are you saying that the trail system would be available to the public? Is that?
Yes, it would be, yeah.
Thank you.
Yep, so this is a site plan. We had two submittals, one that had an aerial on it, that had some topography. Understand that might be kind of hard to read everything that's going on there. We also provided this cleaner version without the aerial. So what we'd be looking to do is off of Bucksport Road, have a new access. There's currently an access drive that services the residential property to the west. We would prefer not to use that access. We have been coordinating with the DOT about having an access kind of mid-property instead of with this existing access. And all things look positive there, particularly since this piece of land was not subdivided, last subdivided prior to 2002. And that's kind of the DOT's cutoff for having some of their more recent stricter requirements for driveway spacing. What we would build a road that would go back in two different phases. The first phase, I can zoom down here a little bit. So the the trailer sites would be these blue sites, kind of the first thing that you'd experience coming in. We then have the campground sites located along here. And with that, we'd have a septic system, we'd have a well, and a cistern and some snow storage throughout that whole area. That would kind of be our first phase of construction. We build this stretch of road up to this T where there could be fire truck turnaround at that T. We then launch into our second phase of construction where we'd be building somewhere around 10 tree houses in this northern portion of the property. Kind of around, there's kind of a little ephemeral stream that comes through, and we would be building most of the tree houses around there. There's also a ridge up here that we'd have some tree houses up on, and then a back ridge as well. And we'd have septic systems that would be all around those tree houses. Any questions on the site plan, the conceptual or sketch site plan?
Not yet.
Good. So just some examples of some glamping sites that we were thinking of. So this one on the left is actually a project that Matt worked on, that he did the structural engineering on. This one on the right is just kind of a pretty picture of something that we something of a character that we'd like to have for these glamping sites. So possibly a bathroom that are part of these glamping sites, bed, and then a little kitchenette more than likely. Here's an example of a tiny house, again on wheels, and we may purchase a few of these to park in those trailer spots, or we may just use those trailer spots for rent to trailers to be able to use, camper trailers I should say. Here's an example of a tree house. This one is anchored to this tree. We may or may not be doing a tree anchoring, still to be determined. We'd need to go out and do some survey of the trees for their health, and if we could actually accomplish something like what's shown here. If we couldn't do that, we would do something more like foundations, footings that would have columns, likely timber columns, that would go up and support the tree houses. For the interior, we'd be looking to have just a minimal kind of kitchenette, minimal bathroom, that type of thing. We're not looking for a full dwelling space with these tree houses. It's again, we're looking for short-term rentals, not long-term rentals, and in fact, we want to discourage anything like a long-term rental. And so we'd be putting just a kitchenette, small sink, small refrigerator, microwave, and probably a little a stovetop burner as well. We would also have a pavilion. This is an example of what we're thinking of. Again, just at the sketch plan level, we're just kind of scheming on the look that we want to have. As we move towards the preliminary and final plan, we'd obviously be developing these concepts more. So some highlights of the ordinance as we've read it and as we've talked it through a little bit with the city staff and Alina and others. We've looking at the chapter 56, article 3, and that campgrounds are allowed in rural zoning. In the article 14 in definitions, the campgrounds are defined as, I'll just point out here at the end, temporary living structures, or shelters, I should say. So tents, campers, trailers, travel trailers, etc. What we've talked through so far with the city staff and Alina is that likely everything that we're proposing is fits under that definition and not the dwelling unit definition that is really kind of more around a permanent dwelling structures. Since we are looking for these to be temporary, we thought the campground definition was better, and that's what we talked through so far with Alina and the rest of the staff. However, Alina did send over a definition today, and I think, Alina, was that sent to the board or was that just to us? I wasn't quite following.
It was primarily sent to the board.
Okay, gotcha, thank you. And in that, Alina just pointed out that the state definition for campgrounds only includes trailers, or I'm sorry, tents and camper trailers. And our question on that would be, we think that would definitely be for any permitting through the state that we need. But our question would be back to the city on if that same definition would be applied to us in our development, or if the city ordinance definitions would be applied. And if we could have two different tracks there, one for state permitting and one for the city definition of how we develop this site. Is there any feedback on that point?
Well, that point there, Scott, I mean, it's definitely gonna be something that could alter your whole plan as to what the state decides or what the city decides. Obviously, you and Alina and the state are gonna be working on the definition, so to speak, as to what this project actually is, because that's gonna kind of send you in one direction or another direction. And until, kind of, I would suspect until that's decided, the board is, you know, it would be kind of hard for us to go forward with a review of it.
Can I get some clarification
Yes.
on that? So the glamping tent sites, they don't, so they have their own bathroom facilities? They
It
do-
looks like they do, yes, and maybe even kitchenettes.
And they have kitchenettes, is that correct? Any applicants, feel free to answer.
Yeah, that's currently what we're thinking, that it's possible that we would have a central bathroom instead of individual bathrooms. I think we'd prefer to have individual bathrooms per each tent. But if there's some roadblock in the way of accomplishing that, we can certainly do a central bathroom. But for the kitchenette that we were thinking, we were not thinking of a sink with that. It would just be kind of just a fairly simple setup with refrigerator, a stovetop, and a microwave type of thing.
And same question goes for the tiny house. What type of facilities would they have?
Yeah, so those would have a sink and then a stovetop, just a small stovetop, likely movable, right? So kind of this example that I had shown here is about what we're thinking, right? So stovetop that you could take out and put on the top, coffee maker, refrigerator, microwave, and just a small little sink.
Okay.
That's
And then
Again, this is just an example photo, but this is kind of the character of what we're thinking about.
Sure, and then the same, again, for the tree houses, similar to the tiny homes?
That is the tree.
Correct. Yep. And I'm sorry I missed that. You were asking about the tiny homes. Yes, the tiny homes typically, what we're thinking for the tiny homes is likely those would be pre-manufactured. And typically those do have the kitchen facilities are kind of more like what's included in like a camper trailer.
Okay. And these are you proposing to rent some of these to be available year-round, seasonal, both? Mix of both?
Yes, so the tree houses and tiny houses would be available year-round. The glamping tents would just be available seasonally.
Okay. And in you're proposing limits of 30-day rentals?
Correct.
Could someone rent multiple 30-day chunks in a row?
No, I think we would very much set it at a max and not allow anything more than that.
Well, my opinion is these are dwelling units. I don't know how they have independent living, cooking, sleeping, and bathing facilities. I think, they can kind of wiggle around a little bit and try to hedge off here or there, but, if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's, especially because it's for up to 30 days, you can't expect people not to cook for themselves and all that, so, that push it, and especially considering the state's comments, does this push it into a hotel motel? Maybe it does, but that's permitted in this zone, correct?
It is, and if you look at the definition, it actually talks about a building or series of buildings
Yeah.
for a hotel or motel, which was kind of surprising, but that's also consistent with some other things you see in rural coastal Maine, little cabins.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm not saying I don't have any problem with it, I just think I don't think this is a campground when, as far as our definitions go, you can call it a campground, but as far as the intended use, you have multiple individual structures that have cooking, bathing, and sleeping facilities. I mean, that's a dwelling,
Laurie might have some thoughts on that, but I'm sure she does in fact, but there's also, what's temporary shelter?
Yeah.
Is it something that has footings in the ground? Or is it a tent you can sling over your shoulder?
Well, I guess my other question is, well, even if you get rid of the tents, you still have tiny homes and you have houses and tree, whether there's a tree, they're in a tree or not. Again, this is just my opinion, but if we were to determine that this is more of a lodging, hotel, motel, how does that change the review, the requirements under our land use ordinance?
Yeah, if it was decidedly not a campground, then a whole number of performance standards in Article 8 specific to campgrounds then wouldn't apply. Some of those are not so much of a concern to me because it's things like water supply and wastewater disposal, which are likely to be captured in many ways by the state rules anyway. But then there's other things like reviewing the locations of campfires and what were some of the other, providing that recreational space on site. And
So are campgrounds actually more rigorous in review than a hotel or a motel under our ordinance?
I don't know that it's more so, well, no, it probably is, unless you had a campground that was so small that it wasn't also a major use site development. But either way, this proposal as it stands triggers that major use site development. So I suppose, yes, campground would be more restrictive in some ways.
So, I guess, from the applicant's standpoint, rather than, it may be in their advantage rather than try to dance around the definition of dwelling unit, just propose these structures as they are and.
I mean, I still don't think that a hotel or motel contains dwelling units.
Sure, okay, so, yes, so either way, either they're dwelling units and a campground, or dwelling units and not a campground, or they're a motel hotel.
Right. Which is nested under a larger category of lodging, so
Mhm.
that gets us away from the incongruity of calling it a hotel or motel, but.
Yeah, or just under lodge, so it's either lodging, campground, or.
Or residential.
Or residential
Yeah.
units.
Right. But I can't imagine that if they were dwelling units, you would ever meet all the other codes involved, you know? It's kind of, we've discussed this at length internally, and not only because of this project, but because of other, ideas that have come to us, and, it's a complex interplay of zoning, building codes, the standards involved, the definitions. It's kind of a gray area and a new edge. I mean, it's innovative.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Curious, Lori or Elena, do we have other tiny houses that folks put in Ellsworth and that we're aware of, and how were they treated?
like in a group,
Yeah.
Well, I guess it depends on what you consider tiny house.
Anything under 400 square feet, the state has adopted.
Because, I mean, the one on the Bucksport Road on top of Twin Hills was kind of labeled tiny house, but those are 800 or 1,000 square feet, the couple houses that were built.
the state definitely, do they care if it's on wheels?
For tiny house?
Yes.
If it's on wheels, then it needs to be registered. If it's not, then it's personal property.
Okay.
So it's just the way you pay either way.
So, I mean, the tiny houses are, it's nothing more than a wooden camper trailer. I mean, they pretty much have the same facilities inside. You know, bedroom, bathroom, kitchen area.
The tiny houses, well, like what he's got on the board there, I mean, you can presumably register that for travel over the road? Okay, so, I mean, it's effectively a camper.
But it's there year-round, and it's are they gonna be on wheels the whole time, or are they gonna be permanently fixed to the site?
No, they definitely be on wheels, and, yeah, but our vision for like, a lot of the things that we've seen available are for lease, and so it might be a few year lease type of thing, and then we might be in and out type of thing, just depending on what makes most sense for the business.
But they would be there year-round and available for rental year-round?
Correct, that's, yeah.
So many rabbit holes with this one. But I am curious, like, if this was, if this wasn't a tiny house, you know, made of cedar, and it was just like a Sportsman Classic travel trailer, and it was gonna be there year-round, would we be asking the same questions about it, or would we just treat it as a travel trailer? Is the fact that it has wood siding throwing us for a loop, I guess.
I don't know.
I gotta say, I think perhaps the prudent thing to do is to get an opinion from a lawyer.
Possibly. I don't know if we're
As to
quite
what-
there yet.
Okay. I mean, you know,
Well-
just exactly what this is and, you
Yeah.
know, how do we review it?
Well, I think it's interesting, though, that when we look at this, so if it's a hotel, motel, or a lodging facility, it doesn't trigger the requirement of a dwelling unit.
Right.
So then that, you know, potentially allows them to avoid some of the requirements for a dwelling unit. Is that right? Lori?
In terms of construction,
Yeah,
When it comes to the tiny house, they would have to follow the tiny house construction the state's adopted.
yeah,
And the tree house is gonna have to follow a dwelling, basically,
yeah,
with insulation. If they're using them year-round and they're heating and cooling them or what have you.
yeah.
It's gonna have to have insulation and meet the building code that the state has adopted.
Regardless of what we call it, a campground or otherwise.
Yes.
And then so again, I guess it comes down to the glamping sites.
Those I don't have any regulations for, but they're using them seasonally, so
Yeah,
it
so they're being
wouldn't
used
interfere with the
seasonally.
energy code.
Yeah, but so then okay, so to me that means, maybe, follow me. So regardless of whether or not they're a dwelling unit, we're either dealing with campground or lodging, both of which are permitted as long as they meet all the requirements. The state is saying we're probably gonna require them to get a lodging and potentially campground requirement, or just lodging?
They were leaning pretty heavily toward lodging only.
Okay. So I guess then I don't see, so it sounds like what they're proposing, it doesn't matter how if it's a hot plate versus a full oven, we're gonna review it the same.
Well, no. Because if it did have a full oven and, that's when you are definitely in dwelling unit territory.
So a motel can't have a full oven?
Typically, they don't.
Right. I mean, even if you had like an extended stay, it probably wouldn't have a true full kitchen.
At the most, they usually have coffee makers and, the bathroom,
Microwaves.
shower, and that type of thing.
Well, I don't think it's a case of typically they don't. You know,
Just they
they're-
don't.
Is it okay to have one?
I mean, we're in the rural zone. You can have single-family homes galore with the appropriate minimum lot sizes and everything. But, so that gets into a question of subdivision. Yeah, it's very close to that line. The tree houses in my mind are very close to that line of a dwelling. The more glamorous tents, not so much, because they're not even designed for year-round use or habitation. So they can't be inhabited permanently. The tiny homes, what Laurie's referring to, I think is recent legislation that is still being digested in the code and planning world, which I believe was intended to increase flexibility for people and deal with some housing issues. But that's not how it's being applied here. It's being applied for short-term lodging type stays. I think that we can continue to refine this or to refine kind of our linearly put it together of the different things that are coming into play and maybe kind of map it out in a way that can be shared in front of you. Because it seems like it's going to be coming up regardless of this project. And I thought that I had landed pretty solidly in campground until I started thinking a bit more and looking at that hotel motel and realized that their state review wasn't gonna be limited to that of a campground. However, I don't know that we need to go to our attorneys at this moment until we do a little bit more of our own due diligence, but we can react to the proposal that we have, which as a sketch plan this is kind of the advice. Here's what it's looking like and here's what we're thinking about and questions we have. If we receive a preliminary plan is complete like any other, that might be the time to get into real, if we're not certain, or, then we might internally seek assistance. If we are certain, our decisions are appealable. So if it's,
felt by an applicant or an abutter that, say we come down and say, this is a campground, forget it all. If that determination bothers somebody, they can appeal that and ask the Board of Appeals to interpret the ordinance. So, there's always paths.
Scott, in your, in your application, in a couple different areas, as far as water, sewer goes, you're kind of saying, we might do this or we might do that. I mean, at some point, like, if you bring us a preliminary application, you're gonna have to pick one.
No, definitely. And again, we recognize we're at the sketch plan review.
Yep.
We're really just wanting to get feedback, and on all these issues too, we recognize that we don't fit in one category very neatly within the city ordinance. We recognize that what we're trying to do is a little bit innovative and outside the box. And so that being said, like we really do want feedback from the planning staff, the board, from the public. What can we do to make this development the best development that we can? And so that being said, right, like that sketch plan application had a lot of, hey, we might do this, might do that. But as we receive feedback and move towards that preliminary, we'll definitely be selecting just more engineered solutions and definite solutions. So.
Scott, what's your kind of desired time frame here? I see the proposed two-phase approach. Would you be looking to break ground, get started this year if you close on that property, or what do you think?
Yeah, no, good question. So it was one of the last slides we had. So looking for approvals on that preliminary and final plans this spring, possibly early summer. Looking to get started on infrastructure, so the roads, the cisterns, possibly some of the septic systems this summer. But then next year, we'd be looking towards developing those clamping sites, the camper trailer sites, all the septic systems associated with it. And then the summer of 2023, really launching into renting out those clamping and short-term rental site, camper trailer sites. And then really starting the treehouse construction next year. And then we're envisioning that treehouse construction probably extending 4 or 5, maybe even 6 years. Tim is going to be acting as the general contractor and doing a lot of the work himself, and and I'll probably be coming out every once in a while and helping. So we'll be taking it slow. We're not going to be burning any barns building this up. So.
Scott, some of the,
Considering your location, that's good.
Scott, some of your possibilities too were whether somebody could drive to, like, say, the treehouse site, or maybe they're gonna have to park a ways away.
Yep. Yeah, so we kind of wanted to provide a mix of sites that had easier access for some folks. I didn't really just talk about this too much, but some of the sites on the ground, right? So some of those tent sites could have ADA access. You could drive right to them, have ADA access. But obviously the treehouse sites would be harder to provide ADA access to. If need be, we could consider having, there's some kind of, you can kind of see it on these aerials, there's some fairly good topography. We could consider things like a drive out or a walk out onto a pathway that would provide ADA access out over one of those hill lookouts. They're not really cliffs, but just hill lookouts type of thing. And so the idea, to answer your question, or attempt to try to answer your question, we'd be looking to have some of the sites be very easily accessible, even ADA accessible, and some of them providing that true kind of more of a rugged experience, a solitary experience where you park and then you might have to walk walk up to them. We have talked that through with the fire department a little bit on if we were doing such things, locating those tree houses within a distance that the fire hoses could still reach. Does that answer your question?
Yes, I mean, and the fire access was part of that. If, you know, do they have to drag a hose to a tree house that's, you know, on a walking path, or, I guess that's for all you to figure out, and I mean, the parking too, I mean, I know you're trying to limit the parking as best you can, but I also know it's like, you know, if you were able to build some of those bigger tree houses that you say may, you know, sleep 4 to 6 people, you know, is there gonna be enough parking? I certainly don't want a big parking lot, but, I mean, that's certainly a consideration.
Yep. And I think that's, you know, we were really, when we said 1 parking spot per unit, we're really just trying to limit the traffic. Again, kind of feeding that into the overall vision for the project of wanting guests to be able to experience just solitude and peace. We don't want 30 units out there where traffic's going up and down. And so that was part of the intent with limiting it to 1 space per unit, but certainly I think we would have some consideration for if we had some bigger tree houses that could sleep 4 to 6 people. We might provide 2 parking spaces type of thing, but I don't see that substantially impacting our parking count. We might go from 18 parking spaces to like 24, something like that.
I mean, you mentioned some issues with ADA accessibility. Does a tree house have to be ADA accessible? Tom?
As we understand it, we wouldn't have to provide ADA accessibility to all of the units, just some of them. And that the way we were thinking about it is that would apply. We would definitely apply that to some of the glamping sites, and possibly to a tree house or 2 if we could physically make it work. But I know there is ADA code for how many units you need to have, that type of thing, and we'll definitely abide by that.
I'm just interested, where did you come up with the name for Dawnland Campground?
Yeah, so as we understand it, that was one of the original names for Mount Desert Island. Obviously, we're not on Mount Desert Island, but that's kind of how we came up with that. And the idea that this is one of the first areas in the country that gets sees the dawn.
I would recommend you do some research about the cultural significance of that term for the indigenous people here.
Yeah, as I understand it, Dawnland is what the Wabanaki people's name, the interpretation was for this area. So there's actually a documentary that was recently out called Dawnland that focused on the Wabanaki people, and along Molly's suggestion, I would look into that more. I don't know if you have any affiliation with the Wabanaki peoples, but it's something to consider.
Yeah, we do not, and appreciate the feedback there.
And there seemed to be some discussion in your application, and maybe with Elena, as to whether your road would be paved or not.
Correct, yep. And we were hoping that, we're anticipating that there's less traffic than 100 ADT or 100 peak hour trips. And that was based on the ITE manual, the Institute of Traffic Engineers trip generation manual that had just listed for peak hour traffic for a campground of the size we're looking at. So the lowest it had on the table was 20, and that's where we're at. And it was about 8 to 10 trips per hour for that peak hour. And we definitely, as we move towards the preliminary and final plans, we definitely do some more more digging there on what the expected ADT was, but we don't expect that to be less than 100. And that being the case, we were hoping that we would not have to pave the roads again to fit that natural character of the property. And just recognize that, again, we don't fit neatly into any of the categories of residential or maybe even campgrounds or lodging, but just for the street standard ordinance, there's the 3 different definitions for streets, right? That would apply to us, or that possibly apply to us, the residential, the private residential, and the site roads. And we thought we fit more in the category of the residential street, although we recognize that we don't fit quite evenly into that category. What we were thinking is that we take the more stringent of each categories between the site road and the private road for the geometry. And then the speed limit as well. So we have it posted at 15 miles an hour. We would do the wider of the requirements for the travel way, the wider the shoulder requirements, and and then radiuses, all that. We do the wider of those to really get the best or the more stringent, I guess, of each of the categories. And then we'd also do the thicker site road subbase. But what we're proposing is not to pave it, to maintain that character. We feel that if we pave this road it would substantially change that low impact character that we're going for, that campground character that we're going for. And recognize that campground classification is a little bit hard to find based on what we're proposing.
The Thomas question for you. I'm sure the conversations are early and ongoing, but where they are talking about operating year-round, which is interesting for a campground in this area, year-round, actually what comes to mind for me is less winter and more like spring, mud season, and this road not being paved and the ability to get trucks up in there. What are your thoughts?
So we've talked about it, and we're still kind of looking into it. I didn't put too much thought into this being a sketch plan. The 3 of us have sat together a couple times, gone over this, and it really goes to what they provide at preliminary of exactly which direction they're going in. We have a lot of dirt roads here in the city of Ellsworth. If they're maintained correctly and they have the right pitch, they usually don't get muddy, or we could put the restriction on them after the fact to sit there and say that, if we find that, the road's not being maintained, we could levy certain restrictions on them. Or to basically just say, okay, well, you need to do something different and provide and come back to the board with that if possible, if they're not meeting that requirement. As far as getting out to some of these tree houses, we discussed that they're only going to operate the ones that are easily accessible due to the pathways and stuff like that during the wintertime. There will be impossible for them to get out there to shovel these walkways constantly 24/7. So the ones that we're trying to do is the ones you can get right easily with a plow truck, and those would be the ones that they were talking about operating year round.
Okay, thank you.
And the reason, this is not, at least at this point, not a subdivision, but in the recent past, the city has approved residential subdivisions, and they've kept a gravel road.
Mhm.
So, it's not that it's prohibited.
Right. And there's still lots of other design standards.
Yeah.
And it kind of comes down to what the ADT will be. There is a provision for the planning board to waive paving in the rural area if it's under 100 ADT.
I think road design would be really critical. This is not on a mountain, but it's also not on flat ground. So there are, I don't know whether you want to consider it a significant elevation change, but, certainly not flat.
And it's quite long. I mean,
Yeah.
other communities, not Ellsworth, but other communities will have a maximum block length or a maximum driveway length and say that you can't go more than 500 or 1,000 feet into the woods with things because it is challenging. We don't, but, you know, just food for thought.
Any other questions from the board, or from you, Scott? Any other
No,
comments you wanna make, or?
I think it's, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm just saying, anything else you wanna bring up?
Yeah, no, I think that hits all of it. I mean, those were some of the questions that we had, just how, number one, how we're defined, right? Campground, or otherwise, and then, what process we need to go through, depending on, either definition. And if I'm hearing the discussion right, if we're defined as a campground or for lodging, then we just have to go through that major site plan review. Is that correct? Not the full subdivision review?
That comes back to the definition of dwelling and,
I think that's to be determined, Scott, between you and the city.
Yep. But
And maybe
no
the
matter
state.
what, the uses are, whether it's campground or lodging, or a dwelling unit, they're allowed for that rural. The question would come down to is if we would have to go in to only the major site plan review, or if we'd have to add the subdivision process onto that. Is that correct?
yes.
Okay,
Yeah,
good.
they're all permitted uses. You know, there might even be, and this wouldn't be such a like heartache to figure out if we had a 10 or 20% vacancy rate in this area, but we have a 0% vacancy rate.
Yeah.
So it
And if there's
almost might behoove somebody to consider these tree houses dwelling units if they could meet residential code, but I don't know if they could, because then you could rent it out for the winter to one person for the whole time, you know? It would change a lot about the plan, but,
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it comes down to the ordinance obligations, right? I mean, the uses are allowed, and then it's gonna be up to the applicant to decide if they wanna fulfill those ordinance obligations based on where they went.
right, and which use is it most materially similar to of the ones we permit? So it's very
Yeah.
gray right now.
And I think our preference, if we could, be more classified as that campground, it seems like that simplifies some things rather than I would say campground or lodging rather than a dwelling unit. And if there's things that we can do to help that definition, things like we had said 30 days, but we could easily revise that to 2 weeks to 14 days, right? And our business model would still be sound, even with that. And if that would help that definition, if there's other things that we were trying to do that I guess I didn't touch on quite yet, but the other thing we were trying to do for those tree houses, so the small kitchen, so not a full kitchen, just a kitchenette. But then also just no closets for the bedrooms. Typically for septic design anyway, that's what defines what how you design a septic system is based on the number of bedrooms, and the definition of a bedroom is if it has a closet or not. And we'll obviously working with the state on permitting the septic system. We'll need to coordinate with them on that to determine an appropriate flow rate. Even if we don't have a bedroom, quote bedroom associated with these. But we're trying to do things that would discourage long-term rental at all. Like, we don't want to operate that way, but we also want to provide the city some assurances that if we ever sell this property, that we would, whoever would buy it would have a difficult time operating it as a long-term facility, without subdividing, without going through the proper channels there. And if we need to do things like put a deed in place that would specify that for any future owners, we can certainly do that.
And I think the issue of short-term rental versus long-term, I mean, I think that, you know, you keep it as a short-term rental and it's more of a renting a motel room type, and you have more flexibility as to removing that tenant from that facility if it creates a problem. If you get into more of a long-term rental lease, then you may very well end up having to evict somebody if it creates a problem. So I mean, I think it would be a benefit to the project to keep it as a short-term rental and not get
Yes.
into that eviction problem.
Can
Mhm.
I normally wouldn't ask a question, I feel like the planning board, but since I didn't get to ask it at technical review, I think it might inform us all. So to this whole topic, like, what kind of market analysis or what kind of clientele expectation motivates your decision to make something available of this type for short-term visits, especially with the year-round provision?
Yeah, but I mean, I think quite simply the proximity to the park, and that visitors are visiting on a short-term basis. That's kind of our target market.
Thank you.
I'm legitimately interested in hearing the public.
Yep. Okay, before we get to the public hearing, just to kind of give the board an idea, as you look at the sketch plan, now we got an email from Lisa Lewis, and she was talking on behalf of Lisa and Yvonne Cobb. It's not on the sketch plan, but they actually live on down at the bottom along the Bucksport Road to the left. They have two house lots to the left along the Bucksport Road. And then that little notch out, there's also two houses, there's two lots and two residences, and I'm guessing that's probably some of the other people here. I don't know for sure, but I will now open it to a public hearing. If you'd like to address the board, ask some questions, come up to the lectern, state your name and where you live, please.
Hello, I'm Andy, live just down the street from where this is. I got a question about the
Andy, could you give your last name, please?
Jones?
Okay, thank you.
The tiny houses, the trailers, they are trailers, but will they be registered and will they ever leave the property? Because if they're there permanently the whole time and they never leave, aren't they more of like a permanent kind of thing that sticks around?
Well, we don't.
Good question, Andy. I mean, I think our intent that would be that we would leave them there for a while, but just the fact that we'd be considering leasing such units, we may not have them there for like a long term, say 10 years out. It may be for a few years, and then we may terminate the lease and have a period where they're just sites that are available for camper trailers to come and rent.
So
Does that answer your question?
A little bit. So the tiny homes, you don't actually plan to register as trailers because they'll stay on the property through most of the entire life of them.
You know, it's a good question. We haven't actually looked that far. My guess is that they need to be registered to be able to just transport to the site.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, my name is Tammy Wagner, and I live on the property next door. But I have a couple of questions about the campground in general. The first one is that area, I've lived there for over 30 years. And that area is a very, very wet area. It's been, wood's been harvested on it. I've seen skidders that have sunk. There's paths all the way through it, and it is very, very wet. So my question becomes, are you going to be, because of that, and living in Maine, we have this wonderful population of bugs. So between the black flies and the mosquitoes and everything else, and this being pretty wet, will you be using any type of pesticide to bring down the population of insects there?
That's a good question. We haven't contemplated that too much, but I don't think we would. I think rather we'd probably consider some more local kind of deterrents, things like citronella candles, things like that, or the citronella, those tiki torches type of things. That would be more the application rather than a wholesale spraying of the area type of thing.
Okay. The other question, couple other questions I have is, are you going to allow pets at the campground?
That's a good question. We haven't considered that too much. I think we would, but again, we're wanting to be good neighbors here. So I think if there's if there's concern there, we could certainly consider some kind of mitigation measure there or restrictions.
Okay. And a lot of the campgrounds in the area, when they bring people together, they find that in order to attract people to that particular campground, they do offer entertainment. Have you thought of any of that as of yet? And I'm just thinking of how close the neighbors might be, and if you're bringing in certain activities or those type of things. Have you given any thought to that as of yet?
Yeah, we have, and our thoughts around it is this is very kind of a self-serve, solitary experience. Not necessarily, and we feel like that is the attractant. That people can come and experience nature, right? And so that we would not consider things like movies or things like that, concerts or anything like that to be attractive. That's not the business we want to be in.
Okay. And my last question is, how many of these different types of campgrounds do you own? And is your intention to come in and stay, or is the intention to come in and build it up and then flip it?
Yeah, very good question. Yeah, we don't own any. This is our first. By profession, I'm a civil engineer, and I've done development projects throughout my career, but they've kind of been more on like the residential and industrial type facilities. And this is our first venture into something like this, and to be quite honest, it's probably only the only one. We may consider another one down the road at some point in our lives, but we all have already have careers. Tim is looking to step into this full-time, the building and the operating of it. But we're very much mom and pop. We're not looking to kind of duplicate this elsewhere, or I know others have, but we're not looking to do that. We're really looking to just have something that we can operate for the long term.
All right, thank you.
My name's Eric Wagonet, and I live here. We are the house that was subdivided off the property, my mother and my lot. And I know this lot like the back of my head. I've hunted it and fished it for years. My concern is there gonna have to be any type of an environmental study in regards to this? Because everywhere they're looking to put things for the most part is areas that are either swamp or wetlands. There's a beaver flowage that flows through it that actually is on one side of it. That's the stream that comes down through. This property line coming down through here has a stream that actually feeds a system that used to feed her well. It was where she pulled all her water out of. You don't show it on any of the aerial maps, and the only way you would know this is if you actually physically walked the property fully and got an understanding of what it was. And I'm concerned that there has been pictures taken, but the property hasn't been fully walked or surveyed in regards to it. My other concern is that the road we live on, as you all know, the Bucksboro Road, people fly on that road. And the corner we're on is a blind corner coming around. It's the blind-esque corner by the Book Barn. And years ago, someone wanted to put in an entrance off that piece of property. And they were not allowed to, because they said that with the traffic and things that were going on, they were not allowed to put in a new driveway per se because of the thing. Is there gonna be any studies done in regards to the road that they're putting in? I'm not against the project. I think it's an awesome idea, and it's definitely something that is going to take work to do. But I want to make sure that some things are looked at in regards to it, such as the traffic coming down and around, especially if you're thinking about having campers pull out on that road from that side and things like that. And then I also have a concern is, are these campsites going to have fire pits? And if they are going to have fire pits, are we going to have somebody, or are they going to have someone living on site that is keeping an eye on what goes on up in there to make sure that, number one, there's no activities that aren't supposed to be, but also to make sure when we all know it's been dry, when we have high fire danger, that we don't end up with a fire up in there that they have to try to get to on dirt roads that, as a kid, I used to go up mudding on because I know how bad that pit is, and I know how much water comes down through it in the springtime. So, I have concerns in regards to the application of how it's going to happen, in regards to it knowing the property and knowing what's on it.
On your second point, as far as the entrance road goes, MDOT would have to approve it.
Yes, that's what I was wondering. So DOT will have to look into it and approve it.
Yes.
I mean, I realize there's already an entrance on the road off to the side, because I know where the property lines are.
Yeah, but I mean, it would depend, DOT would look at exactly where they want to put the entrance and determine whether there's enough site visibility and.
Yeah, because I imagine they're gonna have to clean some brush and stuff so people can see coming around there.
As far as, I suspect that this would go under DEP
This,
review.
as it's proposed right now, I think it meets the site law threshold, which is substantial. But then you've got, they haven't delineated wetlands yet. There's a stream crossing involved, it looks like.
Yeah, and for them to get to anything out in the back of that property, they're actually gonna have to go across, there's a stream that runs through there, that it is gonna have to be crossed.
So I
And
listen.
doing that, and the beaver flowage, obviously, as the beavers build it up and it gets high, I went out there, I was hunting out there last year, and the beaver flowage was down, lower, it wasn't as high as it normally is. But there's a pretty good stream running down through there, and you used to be able to catch brook trout and stuff, and I don't know if you still can, I haven't tried in years.
Yeah.
But I was just wondering, those are all things that will be looked into.
Yes, yep.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
And the inquiry to critical natural areas, all that kind of stuff.
All right, that's, I'm sad. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for your questions, sir.
How do you talk now? Hi, I'm Paul Grant. I am the abutting landowner. My property is map 53, lot 1801. It's the property to the east of this property. And I'm here tonight because I've got several concerns, which are really just kind of questions in disguise. I mean, that's really what they are. And I'll go over them and then in detail in a minute. But I've lived on this property, my family's lived on this property since the 30s. I also own a piece of property that is landlocked, that is to the west of this property. And my only path onto that property is across this property. It's a path that we've used since the 30s. We do not have any right-of-way or access across it. We talked about the intermittent brook that runs on the westerly border of this property that doesn't show on the map. I think that should be looked at. I have a firing range on the western border of my property. It goes into a pit. But they ought to be made aware that it's there. Some people get startled when a gun goes off. as Eric outlined, there is a brook in there that is sometimes higher than others. It depends on whether the beaver are active or not. And if they are active, the brook is really high and there's a lot of wetlands. Wetlands, not just muddy lands, but wetlands. They would have to cross an area probably 300 or 400 feet wide. So how would they intend on crossing that sort of thing? I would think that the DEP would need to get involved in this. And I hope that they would not do it by just, you know, there's a way that you can just put in a permit and,
Well, Paul, the beaver flowage you're talking about, I looked at an aerial photograph, and it looks like on the, would be the north, beyond their property line, on the north side, it looked like there were some beaver flowages there. Is that the ones you're talking about?
it's,
Or-
there are multiple beaver flowages on that brook. That one that you saw is above their property is the northmost one.
Yeah.
There's another one that's on my property. I would just soon get rid of the beavers. But it's there. I'm just saying.
I mean, obviously, you know, if they have to cross a brook, DEP will be
Yeah.
closely involved in that.
Okay. The other thing I do have concern about, they show a road on their proposal, the blue line there, I think that's a proposed road. They show a well at the north end of the property. You've got to get a well drilling machine back there.
Yeah, and thanks for pointing that out. That was just a mistake. It should not be. It'd be up closer to the road, the proposed road.
So you're saying, okay, yeah. So with the tree houses back there, tree house 8, you better have boots going to it because you're gonna be in water. The sites down along here, you're going to a very swampy, rocky, muddy area.
Well, when they do more site walks on it, identify the wetlands.
Absolutely,
And it's gonna
that
determine,
needs to be done.
you know,
And-
just, you know, where they can go with roads.
Right,
Everything.
right. I have concern about the steepness of the road going onto the property, and erosion of that road, and being able to get a fire truck up in there, if they're gonna have fire pits up in there and that sort of thing. I would hope something could be addressed there.
That's what the fire guy's for. Richard's not here, so I had to say that at least
No,
once.
that's all right. I have a natural spring on my property that's within 250 feet of the boundary. The reservoir that feeds that spring is underneath this property. I don't know if there's any leaching fields planned for this area or not, but would like to make them aware of that. I'm not opposed to the project. I think that is something that they should know. I think this is far better than a subdivision. I mean, that is my preference. So I hope to be able to work with them to address these issues.
Paul, I would suggest whatever information you would
Yeah.
like them to know of, go through Elena, the planner.
Okay?
Give her that information, and she can get that information to the developer.
Okay.
Sure.
Yeah. Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Anybody else?
Hi, my name is Yvonne Cobb. I'm close to Tammy's house. I don't know how many feet I am. I'm quite a way, but I'm more towards the chicken barn. It's nerve-wracking. This is my first home I have ever bought, and I have my own child, which is my 9-year-old, and I have grandchildren. Never expect to be a mom at 46, but I did become another mama. So I mean, the project seems to be cool, but it's scary knowing that there's gonna be the traffic that is, because we have had quite a few accidents up in that corner. And, it is a scary area. And like as the other people addressed, there is a lot of water up there. And it is nervous. It is a nerve-wracking thing for me, you know, especially with fire and, you know, knowing that it could wipe out my home, you know. I haven't lived there as long as some of these folks have, but, you know, there's a lot of generation that goes on up there, and I'm a part of that now, and it's my home, and I'm hoping to rely there until I go see God, you know, but I just want to know that I'm concerned and I'm nervous, so I just hope that whatever's done can be done in a proper manner and safely, so that all of us who reside up there, you know, can make amends with whatever happens. That's what I have to say. I'm not excited about it, but my sister kind of says, well, it could be cool stuff, but it's my home, and it's like I'm having somebody move in on me, and there's my, you know, where I want to put a window, I don't know if I want to put a window there no more, you know, so, yeah, the road situation is bothering me and stuff, so. But I appreciate it, and I know you'll all make the right decision, so thank you for hearing me, and have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else? I'll close the public hearing. And just to let you folks know, I mean, this is just a sketch plan.
No, I know that wasn't
Oh.
online.
Anybody online, Gary? Okay. I keep forgetting that one, but thanks for reminding me. Folks, this is just a sketch plan. I mean, no decision is gonna be made one way or another tonight, just to let you know that if you didn't.
Yeah, totally not, yeah.
Okay, so, anything else, Scott or Elena?
I don't think so. I think we got really good feedback today. Tim, any questions that you might have?
No, not at this point. Thank you.
So I suspect you and Elena will be talking quite a bit in the near future.
Maybe. I'll be here.
But somebody won't be. This is Carrie's
secret's
last
out.
meeting with the planning board. Yeah, just to let you know, she's gonna be the new HR director. May 1st? May 1st.
Wow. Congratulations.
Yeah.
All good things.
So Tom, are you gonna fill in there?
Be my assistant?
I think she'd kill me first.
I just have one, I think, you know, to your point, they can go through Elena, but I'm sure that, you know, these folks, the proposed developers would be happy to hear directly from the people that live nearby.
Yeah, I would probably just
And
provide the
name.
contact info.
Yeah, and then, you know, if you wanna, you know, reach out to them directly to talk, I think that usually makes for, if a project proceeds, that's the best way to do it, so they can hear from them directly.
Yeah, we'd much appreciate that. That'd be great.
Sounds like a lot of local knowledge, value to be had.
And I'm sure that somebody here in the neighborhood would be happy to walk the property with them if they wanted to do a walkthrough, to really, you know, we can talk about the spring, summer, winter, fall, what they can expect where, you know, if that's something they wanna do.
So they'll be on that property quite a bit to get the information that they need to provide.
And we were out there, Tim was out there, it was just, about a month and a half ago, and there was 18 inches of snow or so on the ground, so it's hard to tell everything that was going on.
Well, your next visit might wanna be before blackfly season.
No, let them enjoy it.
Okay, so we're done with item number 4. You folks don't have to sit around for staff comments, they'll probably bore you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Scott, and Tim, and Matt.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Much appreciated.
If it is, I'll give it back. I know.
How do you respond to calls and everything as planner assistant?
They wouldn't like me. I'm not gentle at times.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, okay.
A little better than me.
Cool stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Every time I turn around, I ask, you need help? No. And here she's gone.
So you have anything, Elena?
Just a couple updates if you'd like. Since, let's see, at the March council meeting, the planning board was designated as the planning committee responsible for all the comp plan process, because somebody does need to be designated as that. That doesn't mean necessarily all that much more than when it's time for public hearings and forwarding a recommendation to the council. That would happen here. I think ideally the steering committee would include maybe 2 of you, and then the subcommittees would include, I mean, I would hope everybody has an interest in some subcommittee, but that's gonna happen over a period of a number of months, so we'll see. So that's some progress there, and we have budget workshops upcoming with the council, and we have a small amount of money proposed in the planning budget to round out the figure we were looking for to do the comp plan. So that's all on the horizon, and you also probably, if you watched that council meeting, they extended the moratorium on solar, really just because it's been challenging to get to the point of proposing amendments, and at that meeting, well, I was hoping to get something scheduled before they start those budget workshops, but that's now only 2 weeks away. And I've gone back and forth a couple times, met with the consultant that I hope to use if it's not something where we need to do competitive procurement, which I hope we won't, because that would mean it would be way more money than is in my budget. So the idea I think we had gotten back to was to do a joint workshop with the council first. I'm less inclined to do that at this point, especially where they'll be busy for weeks and weeks with a meeting every week. Because I have some ideas of what could be done to improve those regulations. I might as well bring them to you and discuss them first, and then we can have the joint workshop, because I've tried now 3 times to elicit comment in a public forum about what they're looking for, and it isn't really specific about what real land use ordinances can handle. So,
With the consultant that you're talking to or talking about, I mean,
Yep.
would he be available to meet sooner than later? I think you're right that we should start
yeah,
without the council. I think there's things everybody here would, I've thought of a couple things that we could do to
Okay.
that ordinance to
Thank you,
improve it, and, I think that part of it we can discuss.
yeah, I think we could do, if you're up for doing just a workshop at our level, we could do that anytime, really. It doesn't have a public hearing, so it doesn't need a bunch of notice. So if you're up for doing that before the April meeting, we could do something easy and just talk about ideas and the quick pass I took.
Is a consultant available?
I don't know if he's available quite that early. He spends part of his year in the Boston area and part in Trenton. So I don't think he's coming up quite yet, so we'd then maybe have to pay travel costs and, right? So I'd like to target and minimize his time to keep it at a budget that I might have money for and or can siphon some from economic development. So I think we could do our own thing and maybe save him for a joint workshop, because his focus is going to be more on the market side of things and what are the conditions of this industry in which we're experiencing high demand and, what kind of things are maybe they looking at when they are citing their developments, but he's not gonna have like expertise to recommend ordinance amendments. So I think we could do our own thing in a workshop, see where we're at, have that bigger discussion between both bodies with the market information, and then go into the process of kind of refining what kind of amendments are we looking for. So that was a long answer, John, but.
So my question for you, and I heard your name pronounced 5 different ways tonight, so I don't know
Story
which
of
one
my
you
life.
want.
Elena Pica. In America, anyway. I don't know if I'm Spanish, Russian, Greek.
I think you're all.
Yeah, I'm worldly.
So you say April, but my calendar's getting booked up, so if you're gonna propose this, I need to kind of get a handle on what time you wanna do this, because the month's gonna be gone before we know it.
Sure. So you said you have some ideas, probably some others of you have some ideas. Andrew McCullough, PE, told me that he had some thoughts about how to deal with stormwater for these. So not having presented one to us, I think that's a nice neutral local perspective. He knows our regulations well. And he knows the type of storms and all of that. He's been a great resource to us on that topic many times. Plus, I actually, Monday morning, I just took the section of the ordinance and started redlining and proposing things that were coming to mind. So I think we have enough, if you're willing to do like a meeting in 2 weeks or something, we could just do a workshop and see, put it all on the table, basically. That's what a workshop is for. So is Wednesday at 5:30 generally a good time, depending on, or regardless of the week of the month?
Works for me.
Cause I think the 20th or oops, or the 27th.
When is their meeting?
The
You said their April meeting.
So the council is, they have their regular
Their council
meeting on
meeting
like
will
the
be the
18th.
18th.
Oh, so
And
it'll
then
be after
every
that.
Monday after that, like until Memorial Day,
Uh-huh.
they have a workshop
Uh-huh,
or a regular meeting.
uh-huh.
Not, which is not to say that they can't meet another day of the week and we
Uh-huh.
can't do anything until it's over, but it's just gonna be a lot, you know?
I'm good with the 20th.
20th, 27th, fine.
I'd go for the 27th.
Yeah, me too. I think I have to be in Northfield on the 20th.
All right, so 5:30 on the 27th?
I think we can plan on it.
Okay.
I'll confirm and make sure we can get a space, if this meeting isn't,
Well, we can meet at the
Or-
bar in my house.
as long as you're okay with,
You're
the
gonna have
public being
snacks,
able
Mark?
to attend.
You gonna have finger food?
Yeah,
I will
I'll supply
totally be
finger
there.
food.
We won't get nothing done.
Well, it gets done on a bar.
It does actually.
That'd be work related.
Could some of the counselors come? Like, could they be invited, and is it
Um,
appropriate if some came?
yeah, I
Just
think,
let them know we're meeting and
yeah, I think a couple can come
But I gotta
without,
make sure you don't have a quorum, because then it becomes a meeting.
Right.
You can't
Yeah.
Notice it.
I mean,
Yeah,
probably
I
only
don't
some
know
of
if-
them would come.
what's that?
Probably only some of them would come,
Uh-huh.
Right.
but hard to know.
And it's not to take the place of a joint workshop, it's just
Right.
to get going while, you know, we have our own ideas and, you've been through this, actually, so why not make some progress, until I can get a better, a better idea of what our arrangement is gonna be consultant-wise and when a joint workshop can fit for everybody, so.
Okay.
Without all kinds of other distractions.
So 27th at 5:30, is that what you said?
Yeah, I mean, let me,
Okay.
Yep.
note it, but let me check on room availability and everything.
Okay.
Make sure I'm not overlooking something, and.
So I think I was supposed to have a Board of Appeals that night.
See?
They canceled me because they're having a budget workshop.
Aren't they usually like Mondays?
Oh, didn't you say?
This is a
Monday?
Wednesday.
Oh, Wednesday. Oh, okay, yeah. I booked the council chambers in the event I had a Board of Appeals meeting on Wednesday. I moved it from Monday to Wednesday.
But it could be like Harbor or something.
No, I think it's available, and I don't have any at this point appeals, so I
Okay.
won't need that room
Okay.
that night.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, worst case, we might be able to go upstairs or.
Mark's bar.
Yep.
Or, yeah, Mark's house with a notice in the newspaper that will be.
No notice in the newspaper.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Carrie,
And-
are those Mylars?
Yeah.
So I'll entertain a motion for adjournment after we sign Mylars.
I move that we adjourn following the signing of Mylars.
Second.
All in favor? Okay. Break out the Mylars.